Good evening and welcome to the People's Assembly. We're in our second series now. We did have a first series called Making Sense of the Crisis, and you can see all of those programmes are all still there on the YouTube channel and on the Facebook page of the People's Assembly. Now we are in a new era, a second phase, if you like. They have failed us, where we think about the different ways in which the government have failed us, but most importantly, how we organise against that. Tonight, it's a difficult topic. There is absolutely no doubt about it. We're talking about deconstructing the conspiracy theories that are going on at the moment. It is such an important subject. We're going to hear from the most brilliant guests, all with their own areas of specialisms. I'll ask them questions that I really want to hear their perspective on, but we'll also ask the questions that you put to them too. So please do, on the comments bar, on Facebook and on YouTube, put in your questions. I'm just going to give a couple of announcements. So we have a National Day of Action at the People's Assembly, and that's on the 17th of October. To find out what your local group is doing, if you're not already part of a local group, please go. And again, the link is going to be put on the comments bar. Please go to the People's Assembly website to find out where your local group is and what they are up to on the 17th of October, because we have to hold this government to account. Doing nothing isn't an option. We also have our crowdfunder, because opposing the government takes money. So please, if you have anything spare at all, please give to the People's Assembly. They have failed us. Fund the Fight Back campaign. My name is Laura Pidcock, and I'm the National Secretary of the People's Assembly. The People's Assembly, let's remember, its origin is in anti-austerity politics, knowing that the way the government has presided over a decade of cuts actually didn't need to be like that, and there are serious harms and consequences to that political choice. We also think in this new era, within this crisis, that it does not need to be like this either. There have been so many decisions that have been fundamentally against the interests of working people and our communities. And to everybody watching tonight, first of all, boring stuff, get this shared, because what you are about to hear really is from the experts. And if you are having battles in your own friendship groups, or you're seeing your loved ones who are starting to believe in some of these, as some might say, quite far-fetched conspiracy theories, then this really is for them to try and be open to a different way of thinking about this pandemic, because it really is scary. We are in a scary point in time. The problem is so big, it feels to overcome. And I think there's a narrative out there by many conspiracy theorists that the pandemic is really a cover-up of some sort for further control from the state, or even by other powers than the state. So the testing regime, the vaccination program, the lockdowns and mask wearing, that it's all really a big ploy to divide and isolate humans, tear us further apart from each other, and that this is really a planned event. These are some of the common themes that I've seen from different conspiracy theorists, some with grievances about civil liberties, and that might be rooted in a genuine concern about the changing or the stripping away of civil liberties with very little accountability, democratic accountability. But we at the People's Assembly do believe that the virus is real. And we do believe that it is a real phenomenon that has occurred not by accident, but the way in which viruses occur is a very complex set of circumstances, and intimately but complexly related to our economic system. And that's big, isn't it? And when you're feeling worried, and when you're feeling lonely, and when you're feeling scared, and you find a community that makes you feel safer, that has a lot of power, doesn't it? So number one tonight, let's just say this, we're not here to laugh at anybody. We're not here to make anybody feel stupid if they do believe in conspiracy theories. We're here to just say we don't believe that this is a plandemic or a scamdemic. We believe that the virus is real, and that working people, because of decisions of this government, are being harmed. So I want to come to our first brilliant guest tonight to start us off thinking about the psychology of this. Alia Butt is a psychotherapist. Alia, you've been on our show before, so thank you so much for coming back. Could you try and talk us through, please, what may be going on in people's minds? What pulls people, draws people towards some of these arguments that they might come to believe some of these conspiracy theorists?
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, and I think it's really quite similar to what you're saying, actually. I think, there are a number of things that have come together at this particular time that add to this sort of recipe for what you might call a perfect storm, actually, that can encourage I think, conspiracy theories, and it can go in multiple directions. First of all, I think the global uncertainty and the insecurity of the pandemic, alongside the lack of clear messaging from the government, the lack of sensible organizing, the lack of care and compassion shown to those who are struggling, particularly with poverty, food insecurity, and real quite difficult problems. I think that results in a breakdown of a shared narrative, and subsequently a breakdown in this sense of what is actually happening. I think also this is during a time where the government are clearly being very disingenuous. They're lying, they are backtracking, and this is constant. And it becomes very, very difficult to then believe the official narrative that is given to us, because we are clear that it's disingenuous. It's somewhat different from what is actually happening. We know that, everybody is aware of that. There is an intuitive understanding of that. And I think also, like you said, these genuine concerns about the future, people's ability to cope, the lack of welfare, hundreds of people overqualified people sort of scrambling for a job in supermarkets, and, all of this kind of insecurity combined with genuine concerns for social control, like you mentioned. So I think, with that simultaneous trust deficit getting bigger and bigger, people are becoming more and more uncomfortable and looking for more and more to help them understand. I think despite this, people do understand or have a feeling that the government is under the influence of big businesses. And, this is actually a structural reality. Ironically, this means that the government are actually behaving in ways that the sort of people who are interested in conspiracy theories or are finding solace in conspiracy theories, they talk about the government being too restrictive, whereas I actually, we can see that the government actually need to impose more controls in terms of proper lockdowns and proper conditions to go with those lockdowns to actually encourage the spread of the virus to decrease. I think, like I said, people are looking for answers, and social media, I think, particularly Facebook, actually, it's developed to access and propagate narratives that take separate ideas of genuine concern and link them in a very simplified, overarching narrative. For example, that can contain them all, for example, like coronavirus, vaccines, 5G, social controls, Chinese power, etc., etc. All of these things can then come together. And, I think similar to Facebook algorithms, people are more inclined to believe what makes them feel validated. When people agree with us, when people tell us things that are similar to the way we think, then there is a sense of reliability in that information, and also in the information that we are understanding, or, the way that we are making sense. And that, coupled with the lack of fact checking, I think, in terms of social media, it can be very dangerous. But, in maybe more psychological terms, I think when people are faced with this kind of confusion and anger and frustration and not feeling safe, I think rather than accepting the very deep-rooted structural problems that are very painful, actually, to recognize, it can keep us up at night, I think. But rather than accepting the unfairness and the inequality, I think there's a tantalization in the idea that, okay, maybe once we defeat this vaccine or 5G or whatever it is, once it's defeated, everything will be okay. But I think the truth, where it's far more sinister, it can be quite hard to hold in mind.
So do you think that, because that is a really interesting point, do you think that, whilst to me, and I'm just being really honest, I'm not kind of taking the moral high ground here, lots of the conspiracy theories seem far-fetched. Do you, Alia, think that actually the truth about kind of capitalism and the way we kind of and you know, lots of the different ways that and Yanis will talk to us about viruses, lots of the complex factors that lead us towards kind of a dangerous world, that the conspiracy theories seem more believable than kind of some of the anti-capitalist narratives that we might espouse in the movement.
I don't know about more believable, but I think there is a sense that, you know, when we're so aware, and, you know, to an extent, a lot of people are aware of racism, sexism, and all of the kind of things, that the inequalities that we have in society. I think it's very uncomfortable to recognize that that is actually really the reality that we are faced with, in my opinion anyway. And I think there is a splitting off of that incredible uncomfortability. You know, it's you know, we would describe it as a defense mechanism, like you talk about denial or displacement. And yeah, I suppose you could say that it's displacing that feeling into something completely different, something that is something, you know, something a little bit more simplified, really, I would say. And there's a real
I was just going to say, what do you think about this? So if we think about movements and trying to change things collectively, and then we think about some of the narratives of conspiracy theorists about things that kind of appear to be out of control, but are coming together of people to kind of reject these theories that are put in their way. Do you think it's about a sense of powerlessness, about a self-soothing? You know, when I've listened to some of these speakers, they can actually borrow a lot of the language of the anti-capitalist movement, but then you don't have to do anything because actually it's all a big conspiracy, and so you just don't need to do anything. I actually heard one of the speakers just say, you just need to say no. That will be the solution, that will be the salvation. Whereas what we are saying is, it's about mass mobilization, it's about a different economic system, all things that might not sound very soothing and comforting in the here and now.
Yeah, I think, you know, like you, I've also watched a few of these videos, and I was quite taken by the similarity in the language, exactly like you've said. And I think there's a lot of this, like, why don't people understand? And I feel like that sometimes, you know, we all feel like that, like, why don't people fight for their own freedoms, or, you know, fight for equality, or, you know, why aren't people in the NHS making more of a fuss about what's going on? And personally, if I didn't have you know, if I wasn't in certain networks and I wasn't organizing and I wasn't doing all of this stuff, I would feel absolutely terrible. I'm aware of that. Like I would be cracking up right now if I wasn't sort of involved in things that are working towards maybe trying to pick the system apart and make, you know, try and make something better, which is obviously a really, really big, difficult thing. And we're, you know, a lot of us are trying to involve ourselves in these things, and that's what happens during a crisis. That's what happens. People have to start doing things differently, and, you know, that's quite a positive thing about this whole situation. But yeah, I think there is definitely this kind of seductive empowerment that comes from believing that you know the truth, and you and your comrades know what's going on. You know, it's very similar. You know, and other people are ignorant, they're sheeple, you know, and there is a sense there that helps deal with a really, really difficult, really, really painful experience of being discriminated against, whether it's class, whether it's race, whether it's gender, etc.
I think a really important comment that's just come in from somebody watching is that conspiracy theories are a method to sow division amongst working class communities. And we've definitely seen that, haven't we? That, you know, a unifying force against the government can be split 10 different ways by lots of different kind of agendas, and that takes away sometimes from the power to pressure the government in the short term to change their mind about specific policy demands, or to get a kind of government that actually would represent the interests of people. I just wonder, before we go to Dr. Yanis Gotzianis, what your, and I know you have to be like immensely confidential, but how are your kind of client group or mental health difficulties very much exacerbated in this crisis? I feel like it's a bit of an obvious question, but these people matter. Alia, like, what's happening for your patient group?
Yeah, I think people are recognizing, from what I'm seeing, people are recognizing the unfairness in society in a way that is making people feel pain immensely, and I think it's really shaken people up, and of course it has. And I think the fact that people aren't really, or the government, let's be honest, isn't really taking care of people at all, and isn't showing any, we're in a second wave now, essentially. There is no clear plan, even in the NHS, there is no real, we haven't prepared for this, and that sends a message out to people, and it sends a message out that you are not cared for. And I think that is really, we can see that manifesting in so many ways, and I do think, yeah, it's very unfortunate the way that the people are being split in this way. And if we had come together, I've moved on from the point now about my patients, but if we, I'm just thinking about what you said, Laura, about the fact that people are being split in this way, and it's really unfortunate, because if we were all working together, imagine what we could achieve. We do all have a common goal. Yeah.
You're right, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because we would have kind of probably all agreed that it was an illusion, that the government was taking care of us anyway. And the pronouncements coming out of government about care and about, being a kind of state guardian weren't true, because we know the decade of austerity, we know the harm that cuts have had. But to that have a wider reckoning, like a wider consciousness, and then the kind of mental health harm of people realizing, actually, the government is not on my side, it's not caring for me. There's a unsettling nature of that, and like, we have to make that empowering. Who is getting us through this crisis? It's our neighbours, it's the delivery drivers, it's the nurses, it's the doctors, it's the teachers. And so there is an empowerment in there too. Thank you so much, Ali. I'll come back to you with people's comments. Please share this live. We want as many people as possible to hear what the guests are saying tonight. When you share it, it also might get it to friends that might not ordinarily watch People's Assembly Output, who you might want to listen to what we've got to say. We're coming now to Dr. Yanis Gortseyanis. We've tried to get you on this show about 3 times, and you've been very selfishly treating hundreds of patients with coronavirus. We understand, and we have had so much admiration, by the way, and don't mind you not having time for us, but thank you for making time tonight. You are an infectious diseases specialist, and I want to kind of go right to the heart of things with you, Yanis. When you hear people claim that the virus is not real, that it's a scam, how does that make you feel?
Well, the immediate answer, obviously, is pretty deep frustration. I've been an infection doctor in East London since the beginning of this epidemic. I've seen it evolve through different perspectives. I've been researching it, studying it as a scientist in terms of writing up papers and things. I've been involved in advising colleagues how to treat it. I've looked after many, many patients with COVID in hospital. And indeed, I myself have caught COVID back in April. And so to hear people online or offline proclaim that this is a plandemic, as the slogan goes online, is quite frustrating. Many of my colleagues have also get quite offended when people raise the spectre of this being all a conspiracy. We're often accused of being part of this conspiracy as doctors within the NHS. For example, as the epidemic peaked back in April, I was online reading frequently the idea that doctors were engaged in enacting government directives to kill patients, for example, or that we were falsifying death records in order to create the illusion of a conspiracy. Now, I myself don't necessarily get offended by these conspiracy theories out there. What I do get is angry and frustrated, but I want to try and understand what fuels these. And I think we've gone some way to at least thinking about this question already with the excellent contributions from the previous speaker. I'm here to hear other people's experiences. It really is interesting how these sort of irrational discourses undergo epidemics of their own in the course of an actual infectious diseases epidemic. And that's not that new, actually. If you think about it, if you look back into history, during the medieval plague epidemics, there was scapegoating and indeed violence towards Jewish communities in Europe who were scapegoated for the infections. And indeed, more recently, in West Africa during the recent Ebola epidemic, conspiracy theories fueled violence against health workers, local and international health workers in West Africa. And I don't think these conspiracy sort of mindsets emerge from nothing. They do emerge in the midst of these crises. But what we're seeing, I think, in at least the so-called developed world right now, in the UK, in America, in Europe, is that the content of these conspiracies is very specific. For example, a lot of anti-vaccine ideology really does sort of dovetail with quite neoliberal ways of thinking. For example, the idea that I, the individual, am sacred, and the idea that anything that approaches a collective attempt to address a crisis is somehow suspicious. And I think that sort of deserves some exploration. I mean, I've got various points I'd like to make, but I'd be keen to hear if you'd want me to speak about anything specific. But I think the other little point to mention is, obviously, in my view, much of sort of conspiratorial ideology emerges on the online right, the political right. For example, the QAnon conspiracy theory that is gaining traction in Europe and in America. But there are also some, unfortunately, small segments of the left that do too buy into some of these conspiracy theories, either inadvertently or otherwise. But I think it's important to point out that liberals, in the sort of broader sense, also have their own conspiracy theories. For example, the sort of often deployed idea that Donald Trump is controlled by Vladimir Putin alone, and that explains what's happening in the United States, for example, or the idea that the Labour Party is institutionally anti-Semitic. These are, in a sense, on the spectrum of conspiratorial thinking. And I suppose what I'm trying to say is that conspiracy theories actually serve to obfuscate what's going on. They're trying to hide what actually is happening, as you touched upon. They simplify a narrative.
Yeah, I mean, there was such a richness to what you said there, and I kind of wanted. I mean, you've gone broad, which is so interesting, Yanis, about maybe what is it why conspiracy theories are actually useful to the status quo. What purpose do they serve? Why are they allowed to carry actually by systems, and why that might be not in the interests of working people, fundamentally against our interests. That is really interesting. And then what really interested me there about what you said, this kind of legacy, this profound impact of neoliberalism, that collective action is somehow against our interests, or maybe kind of tying into more authoritarian regimes in far-flung lands, or that actually might harm our individual liberties, even if inaction ultimately leads to our downfall as whether individuals or as a collective. And I would like you to take us back to something that you know intimately, and that is the science, and that is what is happening in hospitals, before we kind of explore further some of these broader issues. What is a virus? Sorry to bring it back to basics, but what is it?
Basically, a virus is a little jumble of genetic material that's wrapped in a protein structure that can transmit between people or between organisms, because of course the animal kingdom also has viruses. And these little bits of genetic material can hijack your cells within your body and take over those cells for for the purposes of the virus's own replicatory desire. Okay, so to put it simply, viruses are a pathogen, they're an infectious agent, and they result in sort of significant metabolic problems for your body. They cause a fever, for example, when your immune system tries to fight the virus. So we know a lot about viruses. We've known for more than 100 years about the science of viruses. They're very studied. There's millions of people who've studied viruses. There's a whole body of scientific literature about viruses. And indeed, the COVID-19 virus, SARS-CoV-2, which causes the COVID-19 disease, is probably one of the most studied viruses in history. We've already, in such a short period of time, learnt a huge amount about this virus. We've looked at it from all sorts of angles. We know about its structure in detail. We know how it transmits from person to person. And we know, to an extent, how it activates our immune system. So we really know a lot about this virus. There's still a lot we're learning, a lot that we don't yet know, but we're getting there. We're learning, for example, over the last few months, we've made enormous strides in working out how to deploy some medicines against the virus. So I just think that that's quite important to stress. We know a lot about this virus. This isn't some sort of mysterious entity. You can see viruses under a microscope. You can see evidence for a viral infection in a patient who has unfortunately died. You can do an autopsy and look up the evidence of how that patient died as a result of the virus. Viruses are real. COVID is real.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, you say that and it just sounds so obvious to just be like, to everyone that's like, it's not real, just be like, here's a microscope, look at the evidence, this is it. But actually, sometimes the truth isn't enough. It's not powerful enough. And other things are more powerful than the truth. And that must be so frustrating to you, Yanis. Can I just ask you about vaccines? Because vaccines provide like a huge amount of hope for people. I hear all the time people saying, well, when there's a vaccine, we might get back to some kind of normality. Like, oh, I just hope things kind of go back to a bit, good luck to them with the vaccine. But we're here to debunk the conspiracy theories tonight, Yanis. For some, vaccinations are positioned as power and control, and to alter the human species to be even further under a guise of some spell of the state, or bigger powers than the state. So talk to us about your hope of the vaccination program.
Sure. I think there's a lot to say about vaccines, of course. It's a fascinating field within medicine. Again, it's something actually that does fill me with quite a lot of hope. I think it is very likely that we will see a pretty effective vaccine over the next few months. The big question and the big difficulty will be in upscaling the production of that vaccine and ensuring that those who need it get it. And indeed, that those who need it in more socioeconomically deprived circumstances get the virus, or that there is not a huge divide around the world in terms of who gets the virus and who doesn't. So absolutely, we need vaccines. I think we'll get a vaccine, and what I want is more vaccines. A really important point should be made that vaccines are not without risk. The development of vaccines, as with the development of any drug, does involve some risk, okay? But you regulate for that risk. You make sure that you go through certain steps to achieve a safe therapy, whether that's a medication or a vaccine. And I'm quite assured that the big sort of vaccine candidates that are being studied, for example, the vaccine being studied in Oxford, is going to be a safe vaccine. If it's not safe, it won't be allowed to progress through those stages. Vaccines really are, if you look back in history, they really are one of the most successful and effective public health interventions that we've achieved in human civilization. We've saved tens of millions of lives through vaccination programs over the last 50, 60 years. Indeed, this year and over the coming years, leaving aside COVID, we saved, we think, around 3 to 5 million lives a year as a result of vaccine programs. Now, of course, those who are sort of against vaccines don't like the idea that there is a sort of mass program to, and what vaccine programs rely on is the idea that actually there is a common good. Okay, there's a common good. By protecting yourself, you protect others.
It's so interesting. Honestly, Yanis, thank you so much. I'm really interested to see what people who are watching have got to ask you. I'm coming now to you, Peter, before I do introduce you. Please share this, because even if you share now, people can watch back at what both Alia and Yanis have had to say on this programme. The shares exponentially increase the amount of people that watch this. Peter Jukes, you are executive editor of the Byline Times. Your strapline is "What the papers don't say," a fearless form of investigative journalism. A big plug, by the way, for the Byline Times. Go and subscribe to it if you have any spare money. The crowdfund of the People's Assembly, subscribe to the Byline Times too. It is so good of you to come on here tonight to talk to us about conspiracy theories. I would like to say it's niche. When I've seen some of these videos, Peter, online, they're getting hundreds of thousands, if not millions upon millions of views. And Alia mentioned algorithms before, and you know what we see is very much often not within our control in that online space. But I want you to start us off thinking about the weaponization of conspiracy theories and how they can actually be quite useful to divert attention away from what is really taking place in society.
Yeah, well, I'm honored to follow Alia and Yanis, because, you know, they are on the front line saving people's lives. And great to see Michael recovered. I had it briefly. I had a mild version of coronavirus. It is real. It lasts about 3 weeks and very strange. Nothing like flu. So, I mean, there's a classic line from Karl Marx, isn't there, that, you know, religion is the opiate of the masses in the times when opiates were painkillers. I think it's the soul of soulless conditions, the heart of a heartless world. And in a way, conspiracy theories, as Alia and Yanis have pointed out, they provide a narrative. Think of 9/11. It is crazy to think that, you know, 19 radicals could hijack 4 airlines and crash them into 3 buildings. And so it's probably easier to think that the CIA had organized it and blown it up, because at least there's some order. And I do think, and that's Alia's very poignantly expressed, that people are lost, they're afraid of their livelihoods, they're afraid of their lives, they know people are ill, they're isolated, and this overwhelming narrative that it's, well, let's repeat something, Bill Gates is going to microchip you. This anti-Semitic element comes back, George Soros is funding it, is in a way consoling, because you don't have to do anything, as you point out, Laura, and there's order in the world. But beyond that, it is being weaponized. Now, I think, you know, as you rightly point out, the government has a lot to blame for this. And we have to separate, which libertarians don't do, the government, the governing party, and if you like, call it the state, civil society, doctors, journalists, law and order, the rule of law. The government did pseudoscience. I mean, Byline Times and I first spotted the herd immunity. Anathema, let's call it. I'm sure Yanis will agree the herd immunity is nearly always discussed with vaccination in terms of vaccination, and not with a new virus, coronavirus, whose serology and antibody persistent is unknown. But we're pretty sure, and Nafi Zahmed has done brilliant research on Byline Times, that was inserted in the discourse by people around Dominic Cummings around that time. And we know Johnson was thinking about it, said, take it on the chin, Superman, we wouldn't close down the market. We would emerge in this Greenwich speech, you know, like Clark Kent coming out of the phone box with a Superman costume. He was talking about the coronavirus, and he was thinking economically. He was thinking, it's very clear that talked about market segregation. Britain would remain open to free markets while everybody else closed down. Now, one of the amazing things, and sorry for another plug, but the last edition of Byline Times, Anthony Barnett, the founder of Open Democracy, wrote about this. Actually, 90% of the world agreed lives are more important than mere, you know, economy. I mean, in other pandemics, they haven't shut down. There wasn't this priority. And I think that collective action, and we locked down, I'm sure all of us probably, especially people like Yanis who saw it coming, I began to, our office locked down two weeks before the government locked down. So we did take collective action, and the research from has been shown that British people, despite this pandemic stuff about no masks are pretty good at looking after their neighbors and listening to this. So who's weaponizing it? Just briefly ask your question. Well, I'm afraid to bring back the Russian affair, Yanis, because there are some conspiracy facts here that they have in, they may complain we intervened in elections in Ukraine, or America and Britain did, but they have intervened in elections. And it's quite clear, our camera crew was at the second, or the 1-2 weekends ago, the anti-lockdown movement, where you had far right with the English Democrats mixing with people like David Icke. The only 2 camera crews there, apart from them, were RT and Sputnik. So if Russia sees us as an enemy, or America, to create a sense of discord is going to happen there. So they are a small part, I'd say, amplifying this. But I think the key element, as you suggested, Laura, is that within the government, within the right, there is a split. And there is a kind of old school neoliberalism, conservatism, that kind of vaguely believes in the state or regulate some kind of regulation and privatization. And there's a completely anarchic side to it on the far right, which kind of doesn't believe any state at all. We've seen the same networks that powered up climate change denial do the same, if we like to call for COVID, because in a way they fear any regulation, any collective action. And you certainly see figures on the right boosting this, and key avatars on social media. It's been a very, very strange coalescence of information and enabled, I finally say, as you pointed out, Yanis and Laura, by Facebook. Completely unregulated black box, no accountability. We don't know what's being shared. And as legacy media declines to its own faults, let's admit that, people are consuming in lockdown just stuff which they can share and feel good about, which is completely unchecked, we can't even see it. And that is, if you like, the black hole in this pandemic, because at least in other pandemics we had some security of news and media information, I would hope, but we're back to the Middle Ages and the Black Death, where the merest rumor gets amazing traction and spreads, lies travel around the world 8 times faster than truth.
Yeah, I mean, that you sometimes, every time we have a different theme on this program, Peter, like that mountain of kind of defeating whatever it is in front of us as a movement can feel very, very tall, and like we can't kind of sit in that place and feel powerless about it. And I wonder what you think about the online space actually, and its propensity to change minds, or its propensity to solidify, as Alia said, already kind of held beliefs about skepticism over the state or vaccination programs, or lots of my friends, when people talk about creating echo chambers, like, do we need to move beyond this idea that the online space is a place where we can change minds?
I wouldn't exist without the online space. So I don't want to go. I'm kind of off Facebook, but I became, from being a TV dramatist, a dramatist through live tweeting trials on Twitter. I mean, if you see this great movie, The Social Dilemma, it's on Netflix, so I plug Netflix, but it shows that basically it's like the Turing test. Alan Turing posited one day, you'll know computers are super intelligent because we won't realize they're computers. They'll talk. It's already happened, because as the Social Dilemma makes clear, these supercomputers going to beat Kasparov at chess and everything are targeted on our emotions. The worst one actually is worse than Facebook is YouTube. I've talked to various people who've been radicalized by the far right, by Tommy Robbins, and we're helping de-radicalize them. One of the things is they go on YouTube, look at a video about, diet pills or free speech. Soon they get the Islamophobia, because DeepMind is there programming, trying to keep the eyeballs on. It doesn't care as long as it keeps the eyeball. I think there's a lot of that big, as I said, one of the biggest monopolies in human history, targeting our emotions. But I would say the other side of it is that I think my first ever book many years ago, I hate to say how many, 30, was about cities and the impact of urbanization in London, Paris, Petersburg, and New York. And there was exactly this moment. It's terrible. It's full of crime, alienation, all these people, they're robbing my mind. All the greats of modernist works of, I'm talking about big cities, by the way, not Rome, I'm talking about with 1 million plus. Everybody hated it, everybody loved it. And then I think we've begun, places like Mexico, various cities to live together, to understand the challenges of this urbanized world. I think we're going to have to do that online. We're not going to give it up. I mean, you know, we met on social media. We can't actually surrender it to the trolls and bots.
Absolutely not. Yeah, absolutely not. And I am I'm interested to think, because you're right, we can't retreat from that space and give it up to everybody else, and we have to kind of be more aware about how to be critical on it and have limited expectations, I suppose, about what it will achieve and like its revolutionary potential and all of that kind of thing. But I do want to come to you, Michael, Rosen. It is so good to see you, and I think I speak for everyone when we say we are so pleased to see you here. And well, and we were kind of waiting, hundreds of thousands of people were waiting with bated breath to see, are you okay, or are you recovering? How is your healing journey going? So thank you so much for coming. Michael Rosen is an author, poet, activist, and professor of children's literature. I think somebody said today is National Poetry Day. I'm so bad that I didn't know that. I'm really sorry, but you have written so many beautiful and brilliant books. If you haven't checked them out, please check out Michael Rosen's books. But thank you so much for being here. One of the things that distresses me the most about conspiracy theories, actually, Michael, is that I fundamentally believe that humans love each other, that we trust in each other at the root of ourselves, like that it is love that's going to get us through, and we care about what happens to strangers. It is the system which starts to chip away against that legislates against that to tear us apart. And I'm just wondering how it felt being in the kind of thickness and depths of illness of this virus, Michael, and hearing that some people said it wasn't real.
I didn't know about it for a variety of reasons. First of all, when I was very ill, I was just enclosed in a room, as Yanis described it, just in a fever. And then in a matter of days, I was whisked into intensive care, put on a ventilator. I was in induced coma, so I was in intensive care for 48 days. Well, that length of time, 7 weeks or so, is blank. It doesn't exist in my life. I've described it as a kind of pre-death. There's no memory of it other than for the people who were looking after me. So they're the people who know more about it than I do. And then I was on the wards, and then I was in a rehabilitation hospital. So I have that memory. And then since then, I came out of hospital towards the end of June. I've been doing everything I can to make myself stronger and survive. So it's in that period, since the end of June, that I've become aware that there are people who want to minimize what COVID is, as well as the conspiracy theory. So there are several tracks going on here. There's the it's not really very important theory, alongside, well, if it's not very important, then therefore it must be a conspiracy. So I've sort of followed these different tracks. And I suppose it's quite important to not confuse the two, although they do feed into each other. And I follow those on Twitter or sometimes on Facebook, but mostly I followed it on Twitter. And I've been quite intrigued by just simply saying to people, quite boldly, if you like, well, am I making it up that I was ill? Or when I say that I had blood clots in my lungs, or I've got blood clots in my brain, or that I've lost the sight of my eye and I can't hear in my left ear, or my toes have gone numb, or any of these things, am I making it up? And I think very nearly every time I've said these things, the people never answer. I think almost every single time. In fact, it happened today. You trailed this event today. Somebody came on there. Let me not give him too much publicity, but he came on and said that it was the scandemic, or whatever he called it. I then said to him, "Well, did I make it up? Was I ill?" And he just didn't answer. And then I think put up something that wasn't an answer. So this is followed. I think Kirsty Allsop, the TV presenter, she put up a statistic which some people find comforting as well. They put up stats as if this somehow or other is the entirety of our understanding could be expressed in 1 in 10 or 5 in 20 or something like that. There's a kind of lovely school-like belief that if you mention a statistic, that this is the totality of the illness. So I've sometimes said, is pain a fact? Simply just to sort of provoke the matter. You never get an answer to these questions. They sometimes just say, why are you asking the question? Or have you seen this from RT, Russian television? Again, as if that's an answer. So I think it's quite interesting that in a way, the existence of somebody like me with what's called long COVID or long tail COVID, and there are plenty of us out there, perhaps in the world, maybe as many as 500,000, perhaps more, I don't know, that if you confront these, you're calling them conspiracy theorists, but also those who diminish what COVID is, with somebody like me, the sheer sort of walking evidence of that COVID happened, that I was on a ventilator, and that I have these, they're not after effects, they're part of the illness, the natural history of the illness. If you then say, this is me, do I exist? Strangely, there's no answer. I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe some of the conspiracy theorists can explain that, you know, that I must be a hoaxer because I'm a poet or showbiz, or perhaps because I'm Jewish or something, and that I'm all part of the conspiracy and really I'm not ill. And the fact that I'm talking fluently now is just evidence that I'm making it all up. But it's quite interesting. I saw, in fact, the reason why I mentioned the showbiz bit, I followed one little thread that I didn't intervene on that made out that really, isn't it interesting? And they listed the showbiz people who had got it, people like Tom Hanks, who indeed, I think, got it quite badly, and said that he was suffering from various after effects, exhaustion and so on. But it listed them and then said something about love is attracting attention to themselves. So people have found comfort, exactly as Aliyah and Yanis have said, have found comfort in the idea that these well-heeled Hollywood stars, you know, using COVID somehow or other to attract attention to themselves. You know, so they've even found comfort in that somehow or other it's yet further evidence of the wicked ways of the world, as if somehow or other they don't watch movies and enjoy them and don't spend their monies, you know, getting their Netflix streaming. It's that sort of lovely dual identity that people have, that they watch these movies and at the same time spit on these great stars that they love on the one hand, and at the same time are envious and despise them. And so allot them all kinds of false and awful motives in their lives. So I've observed this since I came out of hospital, since I came out on June the 23rd.
And it seems like, you know, just in your life, Michael, the incredible journey that you've been on, because even like the hospital process, I know like Yanis kind of lives and breathes it, but when you're a patient, like it's a whole new world, isn't it? Like intensive care, you might not have had conscious of it, but for your family members, it is like, it's almost unbelievable, the processes, the resources, the intensity of the environment. I don't know if you wanted to say a little bit about that experience of just being a patient in hospital during a pandemic.
At one level, from a just purely selfish point of view, being in hospital and having all that care feels like a confinement. I mean, people will know that used to be the old-fashioned word for women having babies. They used to be, you know, if you read 19th century novels, it's because they didn't want to say having a baby, so they used to call it confinement. And in one sense, there's a way in which when you're in hospital, you feel very confined, particularly as somebody like me, who spent most of his life not being employed, but just sort of waking up in the morning and deciding what to do. Oh, I'll write a poem. Oh, I'll go. So I won't use the W word on air, but, you know, that's as people have called me. So suddenly to be in this kind of confined situation, and it's quite interesting watching other patients. Some people found this very, very distressing around me. People with different illnesses, say in the rehabilitation hospital, who would, you know, say, you know, why can't I go out and go shopping? Why can't I go out and have a fag? And that sort of thing. So that's a very narrow, selfish, egotistical way of looking at it. And then to turn that on its head the incredible selflessness and care coming from people who had no reason to care for me other than the fact they have taken on this profession, whatever it might be, sitting in front of me, whether it's a consultant, a junior doctor, nurses, the people cleaning the floors, the people giving us the food, whoever it was at any level around me, I was just in total awe of what they were doing. But more than that, afterwards, when I came out, I didn't realize, but the nurses who looked after me in intensive care kept a book. So apparently this is quite normal. Yanis will know better than me. So every night, when I didn't even know this was happening, obviously, was that a nurse sat by my bed all night. And then at the end of the night, they wrote it up as a kind of letter diary. So this level of devotion, and I call it that, I know it's a religious word, but I mean a kind of level of devotion. They sat there at the end of their shift, having spent the whole night next to my bed, just watching this grey-faced person breathing and coughing and spewing, and weeing into the bottle and God knows what, and writing up these things for 48 days. And then at the end of it, they gave me the book. So I have this diary of this disappeared moment in my life. And it is incredible. These people, I mean, I may never meet them again. I'll never know them. I may do, I don't know. And, you know, these are people I know have come from all over the world, many of them who have no reason to be that caring, that devoted to my survival. And they're part of the reason I survived. They played me. My wife sent in stuff on an iPad of songs I liked and pictures of our children, my other children talking on the iPad, stuff that I like Under Milkwood by Dylan Thomas, a recording, you know, of it being performed and putting it to my ear. And apparently I would become agitated and wave my arms in the air and so on. But I mean, I just think, you know, if people do that, your loved ones do that sort of thing. But the idea that these people did it because that's their job, you know, you mentioned, how are we going to get out of this business of neoliberalism? How do we get out of the idea that these people stick their chins out and say, it's, you know, I'm just for me. Never mind, you know, why should I wear a mask? You know, it's just up to, if I'm not ill, so what does it matter? Any of this kind of egotistical way of treating it that we've seen all the way through the whole austerity piece, or if we want to go back to Thatcher, the idea that we don't need a national health service, we can just go back to the 1930s and those who can pay, and everyone else will just get insurance. The kind of ideology that's come out of America, attacked Obamacare, so-called Medicare, all of that. And then in the face of that, you can see that actually here are people within the National Health Service behaving with that kind of social, you know, all right, I shouldn't call it socialism, but yet that's how I interpret it. The idea that we do have a social body and that we care about, those people cared that I would stay alive. And I just think I'm so moved.
And not just to get, and Michael, not just to get their wages at the end of the month. You know, this isn't a job for people. I spent, and we're going to move to, after that beautiful kind of explanation of your time in hospital, we're going to move to what other people have to say and put that to you on this panel. And sisters and brothers watching, we are going to go over a little bit tonight to 8:10, but I'm sure you think it is worth it to hear more from our panelists. And I spent a little bit of time, Michael, my father ended up in intensive care and he sadly died, but I feel that real affinity sitting at the side of his bed for a week with these people who don't know who that person is, but tenderly wash your loved one and care for them so beautifully, and care that they have things that surround them that make them feel warm and spiritually nourished and not just medically nourished. And that kind of moves us out of that beautiful place to those people that do that and their demands now in this crisis. and one of their demands is that they get a 15% pay rise. And I bet you would quadruple that if you could. But I'm sure, Michael, you stand behind that demand from nurses asking
100%.
for a 15% pay rise.
Yes, I mean,
you have it on record.
Of course, I support that, and I don't know whether you know, but I wrote a poem called "These Are the Hands" for the National Health Service, and it was meant to be a tribute to everybody at every level in the health service. That it isn't, of course, we appreciate what consultants do. Of course, you can't put these things together if there aren't the wonderful things that consultants do. On Tuesday, I'm going to have a little microtube stuck in my eye with the brilliant hands of a consultant. But at the same time, you can't do that unless the floors are clean. And, everybody, it's a huge organization. I hesitate to use the word army, but it's got all the logistics of a gigantic army that's moving across a country. It has to have the coordination of it, but it must reward people for what they do, and people must be able to make a living. There's a new exhibition just opening in the Migration Museum to celebrate the contribution that the migrant communities have made to the National Health Service. There's an animated film, which I'm very proud to have done the commentary on. It's just opened today. We need to not only appreciate it, but as you say, for people to be rewarded with a fair, we used to talk about a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. Of course, we want more than that, really, as we used to also say. We don't want just the bread; we want the whole bakery. But that's further down the line.
One day. I'm gonna come to all of you now. So just unmute yourselves. Let's have a conversation amongst ourselves. This is an interesting question from somebody called David, and I'd like to hear any of your thoughts on this. He said, I think part of the reason conspiracy theories exist is that conspiracies do happen, so that there's like a nugget of truth somewhere. You can't have a system where a majority is exploited by a minority without a degree of secrecy and planning, which goes against people's interests. But that requires an understanding of the system as chaotic and competitive capitalist economy, and the mass mobilization needs to build something better, not a simple defeatism which says there's nothing you can do and here's why. So what do you think of that take that, buried in conspiracy theories are nuggets of truth, and that lots of things that do happen in secret? Yanis?
Indeed. I mean, there's always an element, there's a truth content to conspiracy theories, to most of them. For example, do individuals and elites have inordinate power? They do, but they don't have that power as a result of their sort of individual satanic mindset. They've got that power as a result of their class position, or as a result of the fact that they've accumulated capital. So conspiracy theorists and people who might have other kinds of political ideologies, and political ideology I sort of find quite fruitful to think about is Marxism. And we have different answers to what we observe, okay? So sure, there are small numbers of people, the 1%, who do have inordinate power. But why do they have that power? Is it because they are secret satanic pedophiles, or is it because they're simply engaged in the sort of free market? That's sort of one way of thinking about it. Again, for example, within the anti-vaccine movement, there is this obsession with Bill Gates, this obsession that Bill Gates is trying to roll out a massive vaccine program in order to microchip us and therefore control us in some way, whether controlling, working out where we are at any one time, or controlling our thoughts. Is that accurate? Of course not. Bill Gates does have an inordinate amount of power within the public sort of health sphere globally. The question is how he got that power. And there are legitimate critiques to be made of the power that Bill Gates has. But the critique that he's somehow trying to roll out a mass vaccination campaign of microchips to control our minds actually obscures the real critiques that we could make of Bill Gates. And again, for example, like, vaccines are safe, vaccines are necessary. We're going to see, and I hope to see, a mass rollout of vaccines around the world. But we also need to make sure that we as activists defend the scientific independence of such organizations as the CDC or the Federal Drug Administration, the FDA, whereby they're seeing an enormous amount of pressure from Trump and his administration to, in a sense, bypass some of the sort of safety hurdles that we put in the way of vaccines. So there's always a small amount of truth within a lot of conspiracies. And we do need to hear that, but then we need to be able to give a plausible explanation for what those conspiracy theorists are trying to explain. And they're often explaining it inadequately.
Alia, yeah, come in.
Yeah, no, at the risk of just sort of maybe repeating something I said earlier, but I just think it is important to acknowledge that conspiracy theories are based on genuine intuition a lot of the time. And I think, well, particularly, you know, at this point in time, I think there is a general understanding that the government, you know, that there are linked to influence of big businesses. And, you know, this is actually a result of the structures of capitalism. And, you know, this fact is constantly downplayed. We're constantly gaslighted. I'm going to use that term again. You know, we're constantly told that our reality is imagined. What you are seeing is not real, you know, and now this is kind of, or not now, but this is currently also this narrative or these slogans or these ideas are also being you know, basically the Labour Party are also joining in with that, is what I'm trying to say. It's kind of being strengthened or emboldened by the opposition. And that is, I think, further sort of encouraging people to think that their reality, or being told that their reality is not what they are seeing. You know, we're dealing with this really well. That's just not the case.
Can I just come in there?
Yeah, of course.
That, you know, on conspiracy theories, I mean, you know, I've seen a lot of conspiracy trials and from phone hacking, and there's a definite conspiracy going around medical data. So when we, you know, capitalism's always evolving. So, you know, and the new frontier is obviously data. And that's the gold of, you know, replaces oil, but medical data is the gold. So what we've seen through breaches of GDPR, Cummings particularly driving a whole kind of procurement element around medical data. He was a consultant to Babylon, which is this healthcare app, which kind of siphons off tech-savvy young NHS patients to an app. But he's also worked with Palantir, and he has this company, Faculty AI, which did, under another name, ASI Data Science, all the weird sort of Cambridge Analytica stuff for Vote Leave, as well as IAQ, which was part of Cambridge Analytica. So there's a particular form of surveillance capitalism going on here. It's global. There's so much money to be made of places like Palantir, which runs the back end of a lot of these data stores. And they, in that crisis, never let a good crisis go to waste. We've seen it with procurement on PPE and on ventilators, and definitely hidden under the surface is a huge data grab, which will, it's so easy to move that data away out of government hands into private hands.
Could I just come in here? The name of Karl Marx has been mentioned, and he drew our attention, drawing on Hegel, of the idea of contradiction, that in any circumstance there is contradiction going on. So let's have a little look here. We're talking about conspiracy, and I think we need to draw a distinction between the intention of those, if you like, to conspire in order to wield power, and the effect. So, for example, let's take ourselves back to the great banking crisis of 2008. This came out of an intention to centralize vast amounts of wealth, to use the banking system to create huge hoards of wealth of one sort or another. But the effect was, in actual fact, that the system fell apart. These people could no longer trust each other, and they reached a point at which there was, in fact, a kind of credit freeze. The system froze and could only be solved, ironically, by the government, by the action of governments nationalizing the debt, particularly in America and Britain, as we know. So what happens with this conspiracy that we say there's an element of truth that there are conspiracies around in terms of capitalism to succeed, and this is one of the reasons why sort of ludicrous conspiracy theories, and people have talked about 9/11 or David Icke and his lizards and so on. But at the same time, from the left perspective, we should remember that as much as this, if you like, the capitalists or the capitalist class in league with governments try to centralize power, wield power, they keep, as it were, tripping up over their own desire to do that. I mean, at some point or another, this awful pandemic, as it unfolds, we will find the contradictions within it. So as people have drawn attention, the acts of the Trump clique and the Boris Johnson clique was to start off with the ideology of herd immunity. Herd immunity is an animalistic approach to the human race. And that comes from an ideology that is born out of the idea, it is essentially out of capitalism, that the weak must go to the wall. We heard it from Toby Young, an ideologue on the edge of the Tory party, who had said that, well, you know, the over 70 shouldn't have a ventilator. We heard it from Dominic Cummings, we heard it from various others. So they trip over their own ideology and then find that in actual fact, it will cause the failures at the very moment in which they're trying to succeed in one way or another. So what we should always look out for are the ways in which the very ideas, their conspiratorial ideas, cause them the problems. And that gives us hope on our side to spot these and to magnify them and show them. So I'm using that as an example of the way in which we can fight these, the notion of conspiracy. It's always double-edged, always distinguish between intention and effect.
And you've kind of led us seamlessly to the last I want to put to all, really. Let me just read out a few comments, because there's some really great ones. People saying, you know, I'm feeling scared and isolated, but knowing that there's people like you out there speaking up for us makes this person feel better, which is a really nice thing to say. Somebody watching from Brazil saying, thank you so much for this conversation. Imagine being here with Bolsonaro. So solidarity to you, watching from Brazil. A really common question though, and I'd like to kind of end with this, is about tips for challenging. People are asking, they're kind of fired up by this conversation, and they're asking, okay, so this exists. Michael's just talked to us about one way, which is the inherent contradiction that exists, but John Robertson's asking, how do we constructively compete against conspiracy theories to get the real message out and to build, I suppose, that the broadest possible coalition to defeat the kind of cultural norms and the prevailing political ideology, which does try to do everything to kind of erase what is natural to us, which Michael perfectly illustrated with the love, devotion and attention received from the nurses and cleaners and doctors in intensive care. How do we get back to that? How do we challenge this is the question. I'm going to come to you, Alia, first, and just kind of go through our original running list. So Alia, how are we challenging this? What tips do we have for defeating not just conspiracy theories, but the current crisis that we are in?
Yeah, I think, you know, maybe the obvious one, but maybe not so obvious, is really listening and being compassionate to the idea that these are people who are in similar situations to us, and they are feeling similar frustrations to us, and that's really important. I think it's quite hard to engage with this kind of person who is so deeply entrenched in these views, and without getting very, very frustrated or very, very angry, particularly when they deny things that have hurt us or hurt people that we care about. And, you know, or I think what I've seen as well, it's really, really difficult working on the front line, you know, to then be confronted with this idea or confronted with people who are refusing to wear masks without feeling incredibly furious and enraged and upset. And that's, you know, again, that's the sadness, that's the upset that we're feeling, that why aren't people taking this seriously for their own goals, for their own families, for their own children, actually. And so I think it's really important to start there, to start from a very, very soft, compassionate place and try and understand that these people are, that there are commonalities there. And really, if we are going to try and get people onto the same battleground that we are on, which is really important, and we do have a massive opportunity here, coming very soon, when things do kind of become less manic, let's say, we are going to have to restructure things. We're going to have to continue organizing ourselves in constructive ways that make more sense for more people. And to do that, we have to listen, and we have to try and convince people that there are other ways of alleviating this incredibly difficult feeling of unsafeness and uncertainty and unfairness, I think.
Thank you so much. I don't think like what was kind of shouting out to me there is I don't think shouting at anybody ever changed anybody's mind. Dr. Yanis Gotzianis, leave us with your final thoughts about change and hope and challenge.
It's a big question, of course, and I don't claim to have all the answers at all. I suppose 3 ways to think about it. First of all, and I've obviously engaged with conspiracy theorists online and in person, the first thing, I suppose, is not to be tempted to get too bogged down in the nitty-gritty detail of some of the beliefs being put forward. What you need to do is look under the bonnet, really, and uncover the sort of wider worldview that person is trying to express, and then debate that worldview with them. There's something quite undemocratic about the way some conspiracy theorists see the world, the concept of sheeple or the brainwashed masses. And I think some of that anti-democratic view comes about as a result of the fact that we have a faulty democracy here in this country and in many other countries. So what you need to do is advocate for a democratic worldview. You have to try and restore some sense of agency to that person. You can signpost to them legitimate sources of information or people that they can go to have at least a debate with. I think that's one of the ways to address this issue.
Thank you so much. Peter?
I just pick up on what both Ali and Yanis have said. We have sort of abandoned it a bit in the postmodern movement, but truth matters. I mean, it does matter whether it's, a glass of water or polonium or perfume or Novichok, or if that's got virus there or not. And so going back to sources, I think we have, we do a lot on Byline Times, just explore that, say, these scientists who say it's herd immunity is possible or be over by the summer, maybe they're working with right-wing lobbyists and then find those connections. Maybe look at their previous track record. And in a way, taking heart from what Michael says, you must all see this brilliant drama, Chernobyl, which is about the lies, if you like, around what really happened with the RKB reactor blew up. And in the end, there's a brilliant speech at the end by this whistleblower, Lugasov, who says, truth is always out there. And he says, not what is the cost of truth, the cost of lies. I think eventually truth does come round because it's just so difficult to escape what he's seeing this with the second wave. I do sense the scamdemic movement are quieting down. What damage they've done in the meantime, I don't know. And in a way, let the facts speak.
Thank you. Michael, the last word is with you for this evening.
Thank you. I would say on our part, we've got to wise up. The old left, the left of my parents, was very scientifically informed. We've got to wise up, and it's great tonight we've had Yanis here and Alia. So we've got to wise up. We've got to be able to say in any arguments, we've got to know what is a virus. We've got to know how we catch viruses. We've got to know how viruses can damage and kill, in particular this particular virus, so that when people start talking rubbish about what it is or what it can do, we just say, no, that isn't the case. And to get knowledgeable about all that basic stuff. And it isn't difficult, it is quite possible. But of course, because people have found, quite many people have found school so difficult and hated science for whatever reasons and biology, I'm always amazed at the fact that, people have no idea how the blood circulates around the body. I love biology and even did some medicine, would you believe? But the idea that people go through the whole of their lives not knowing, the fact that their blood circulates around the body, even really how it does it, It always seems incredible. You know, Michael Gove used to say, you've got to know Shakespeare, never mentioned the heart, as if Shakespeare is more important than your heart. How weird. So yes, find out, get to know, so you can argue with people exactly how this happens. And then on top of that, the life history of this illness is not simply whether someone gets it and survives, or even someone gets it and dies. The life history of this illness is the virus getting it and the whole of what a life of a person, which may well be affected by the virus. I still, in a sense, am in the life history of that virus. Okay, not seeing out of this eye, not hearing out of that ear, and the rest of it. And there may be many other effects. So we need to be knowledgeable about that. And then on top of that, as if that isn't enough, we have to stick up for this idea of public health. That is what is our fundamental, that's the basis, that is our, if you like, our rock that we stand by. It was this incredible invention that came out of the privations of the 1930s and the Second World War. And we invented this beautiful thing called the National Health Service. It was an act of love, as you've said, Laura, an act of love of ourselves, not of me, but of us, that we could use the taxation system, whatever it is, to create this thing out of the chaos and anarchy of the old medical system that my parents used to talk about in the 1930s. And that's that cornerstone of public health is what we stand by and believe in, and is our best defense against COVID and against conspiracy theory. And more particularly in the case, as we know, of test, trace and isolate, it shouldn't be in the hands of an incompetent monopolist like Dido Harding. It should have been in public health, in the hands of public health, local public health, where it could have been controlled and efficient and accurate. So that's what we say and constantly stand by it. And we stand by and say, well, you know what nurses are like, you know what doctors are like, you know that when you got this and you got that and you went to your local GP or you went to the hospital and your grandfather did this or grandmother did that. So we stand with that as the cornerstone of this wonderful thing of social care and social medicine that we created and supported.
What a brilliant way to end what is well, I've thought it's a wonderful conversation, and actually I know many people watching this, many people who will watch this in the future will be feeling scared and lonely and isolated and worried about what is to come, and worried about their own personal circumstances because the eviction ban has been lifted, because the job retention scheme is coming to an end, because statutory sick pay doesn't pay, because they can't get the resources that they need, or whatever challenges are facing people, but know that we have each other and that there are people that help. One of the phenomenons that has sprung from this doesn't shock me. It's mutual aid. Humans help other humans to get the things that they need. And goodness me, we are really up against it, and there are no individual solutions to the problems that we face, only collective ones, and doing nothing isn't an option for any of us in our working class movement and all its beautiful diversity. I cannot thank you enough for joining this conversation tonight, Dr. Yanis Gortziyanis, Alia Butt, Peter Jukes and Michael Rosen. We wish everybody watching out there health and comfort. Please share this, because even if you share it now, other people will be able to see it. Thank you for supporting the People's Assembly, and thanks for listening tonight. See you next week.